Hello everyone, it's Saoirse. I just watched a compilation of Leonardo DiCaprio saying "old sport" about 400 times, so we are now ready to finally talk about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I embarked on a plan to read all of Fitzgerald's books last year, and I only read the first two last year, so this is his third book. It was published in 1925. It is by far my favorite out of the three that I've read. I still have to read Tender is the Night. So let's get into this. I'm very excited. You know, if you watched my other videos, I didn't really love his first two books. But this one, it's so short and concise and has so much packed into it in the way of symbolism and gorgeous prose and humor. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I first read it maybe 10 years ago and then just reread it last week. So I'll read you the back here. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's third book, stands as the supreme achievement of his career. This exemplary novel of the Jazz Age has been acclaimed by generations of readers. The story of the fabulously wealthy J. Gatsby and his love for the beautiful Daisy Buchanan, of lavish parties on Long Island at a time when the New York Times noted gin was the national drink and sex the national obsession. It is an exquisitely crafted tale of America in the 1920s. Okay. Doesn't tell you very much, so I'll tell you a little bit more, and there will be spoilers in this video. Many, many spoilers, because I think to talk about a classic book like this and with all the symbolism that it has, we kind of need to discuss the entire arc of the story. So, in the beginning, Nick Carraway is introduced as our narrator, so it's in first person, but very much removed. So this is one of those books where the narrator only exists to show us the more interesting character. He serves as this, like, he's just like the storyteller, and without him, it wouldn't be as interesting to have just an omniscient narrator in third person, because it's the fact that Nick gets to know Gatsby and understand him, and he takes us along for that ride. That is the effect of Nick's character. Whatever, we'll get into him. So he moves to West Egg, and this is the new money part of Long Island, and then there's East Egg. So he meets his cousin Daisy, who's a distant cousin, in East Egg, has a meal with her and her husband and her friend Jordan Baker. And her friend Jordan mentions Gatsby at this point, and this is the best part in the movie, where Daisy's like, "Gatsby? What Gatsby?" So we already know she remembers him. So throughout the book, Nick goes to Gatsby's parties. He finally meets him. We don't meet him until, like, I don't know, 50 pages into the book. So Fitzgerald does this great job of creating this mysterious character that we want to get to, because he's just shrouded in all of these rumors and things, because people talk, and especially back when there was no such thing as social media, people just had to gossip. There was nothing else that they could, like, cling to if they were gossipy people. They couldn't go stalk somebody's profile. So they just all conjectured about what Gatsby's past was, because Gatsby suddenly shows up in West Egg in this giant mansion, and there's a lot of speculation and doubt about the stories that he tells about his past, about being an Oxford man, being in the military during World War I, and so forth. So, eventually Nick learns that Gatsby used to be with Daisy, and then he went away to the war. Daisy ended up marrying Tom Buchanan, and Gatsby has created his whole life around this hope of getting Daisy back. So, meanwhile, Nick has a little relationship with Jordan. We find out Tom is cheating on Daisy with a rather poor woman when compared to the Buchanans. And Daisy knows about it, and basically everybody knows about it. and Gatsby gets Nick to invite Daisy over to Nick's house so that they can stage this meeting. Then the whole romance is rekindled. Daisy plans to leave her husband for Gatsby, and then it all blows up, and Daisy ends up driving Gatsby's car and hitting and killing Tom's mistress by accident, we think. And then the husband of Tom's mistress, understandably, is very upset, but he goes out and looks for the person who owns that car, and it's Gatsby, and so he kills Gatsby in the end, and almost nobody comes to the funeral. So that's about that. There are a lot of themes and symbols in this book, and I honestly can't remember if I read this for school. I think I might have just read it on my own, but if I had read it for school, we would have definitely talked about all of these symbols. So the symbols in this book, they become important. Something Fitzgerald is trying to highlight is that they become important only through the people placing so much significance on them. So there is this idea of everything being kind of meaningless and pointless, and this is something that is, I think, a theme in all of his books, because he seems to write kind of the same story over and over. This 1920s times are changing, kind of like people trying to grasp what's happening, and the rich just getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and people being so distracted by pleasure and fun, and finally having a little bit more freedom because we've left the Victorian era behind, and we've even moved past the Edwardian era, and now there is just this explosion of freedom in terms of sexuality and women not being as, I don't know the right word, they all cut their hair off, you know. They didn't feel anymore that they had to just be like the little angel in the house for their husband. They had lives of their own, and times were changing. So he kind of writes this over and over in his books, and usually with very unlikable characters, but the smart thing that he did in here is to include Nick, because in the first two books, the narrators are so awful, or the main characters are so awful, and you just don't want to hang out with them, and you have no sympathy for them, but he manages here to use Nick as a way to, like, foil Gatsby and show us, he shows us not only what's different between them, but what's the same, and what is essentially human. So anyway, some of the themes in this book, we have the green light. So the green light at the end of Daisy's dock is the thing that Gatsby is always staring at and yearning after. And it symbolizes his not just desire for Daisy and trying to get her back, but it's the past. And that's a big theme in this book, is trying to relive the past. I just keep thinking of Leo saying that part, like, you can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can, old spore. I love how he always says old spore without the T on the end, and I don't know why. I love it so much. So, changing the past, times are changing, we're moving into the jazz age. For some people this is a good thing, some people are making new money, the people who were the wealthy people of the past era are kind of being moved out and becoming obsolete, and sometimes even losing their money, because now everybody's getting into stocks and bonds and all sorts of stuff that I shouldn't talk about because I don't understand it. But yeah, some people are clinging to the old ways, and some people are fully embracing the new ways and the American dream, and Gatsby really represents the American dream, being able to make yourself from nothing into something extravagant. So I'll pull out some lines that help us look at these things. So this is about the green light. Daisy and Gatsby are looking at it. He says, "You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock." Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as a star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by 1. I like this as a way to think about your dream coming true is not as exciting as yearning for that dream, if that makes sense. So let's keep rolling because we got a lot to get through. Another theme or symbol is Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's eyes above everything. It's that big sign for the optician. And so this, I think of it as like advertising. Advertising symbolizes a lot in this world, and it's only gotten more insidious and everywhere. So the idea that it already in the 20s, this huge advertisement is just like watching us, because that's the thing. It's not just like, look at me, it's like, I'm looking at you. And to Wilson, this was God judging. Let's look at a couple of places where this shows up. Above the grey land and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive after a moment the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Their retinas are 1 yard high. They look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles which pass over a non-existent nose. Evidently some wild wag of an oculist set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens, and then sank down himself into eternal blindness, or forgot them and moved away. But his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days under sun and rain, brood on over the solemn dumping ground. And then we see it again after, I always want to call her Muriel, it's Myrtle, right? After Wilson's wife dies. Standing behind him, Michaelis saw with a shock that he was looking at the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, which had just emerged pale and enormous from the dissolving night. God sees everything, repeated Wilson. That's an advertisement, Michaelis assured him. Something made him turn away from the window and look back into the room, but Wilson stood there a long time, his face close to the window pane, nodding into the twilight. So I was looking at Spark Notes to see what they thought, and they were saying it symbolizes the meaninglessness of the world, which is pretty bleak, but when times change, there are always going to be feelings like that, like everything is pointless. And the people who are left behind, who are no longer relevant in this new world, are going to get hit the hardest by that. Let's see, we also have the Valley of Ashes, which is in the same part when we first see Eckelberg's eyes. About halfway between West Egg and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. This is a Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally with a transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud, which screens their obscure operations from your sight. Screening the poor from your sight so the wealthy don't have to see them. This is, SparkNotes again says, it's the moral and social decay that comes from hunting for wealth. It's the plight of the poor, like the Wilsons, which is hidden usually from the rich. They just have to drive through this unpleasant bit to get to downtown or is it uptown? I don't know, New York. To get to New York City and do all the fun rich person things that they want to do. And they just have to look past this. Let's see, there was another mention of it. Oh yeah, so this is just an example of how that works. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. So, rich people completely ignoring the plight of anybody not as rich as them. Let's take a look at some of the quotes throughout the book. Some of them I just liked, and some of them are related to these themes. This one is related to the yearning for the past. And this is describing Tom. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure in a way, one of those men who reached such an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. And then he says, I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom would drift on forever seeking, a little wistfully, for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. Doesn't that just remind you of Napoleon Dynamite and Uncle Rico, and he's just always living for the past? That's the same idea here. And it's something that really bums me out when I think about men who were very good at sports when they were young, and then they just decline and decline. And in this case, Tom is an awful person, and I hate him. But it's a perfect example of that, which I think is the main symbol of the book, which is yearning for the past and not being able to repeat the past no matter what you do. And Tom uses his mistress as a way to stay young or feel like there's still some excitement in his life and somebody still looks at him the way that he wants to be looked at. Some sort of godlike sportsman. Here we meet Daisy and Jordan, and this passage really shows the importance of characterization, of using a first impression to show us a really good characterization, tell us what to expect from this person later. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. I must have stood for a few moments listening to the whip and snap of the curtains and the groan of a picture on the wall. Then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows, and the caught wind died out about the room, and the curtains and the rugs and the two young women ballooned slowly to the floor. And then, specifically Jordan, the younger of the two, was a stranger to me. She was extended full length at her end of the divan, completely motionless, and with her chin raised a little as if she were balancing something on it which was quite likely to fall. If she saw me out of the corner of her eyes, she gave no hint of it. Indeed, I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. So that actually gives us two bits of characterization, because now we understand a little bit about what Jordan is like, and also Nick, because the fact that he would be feeling like he should apologize shows us already he's this wallflower, and we'll get more into that in just a second. So, this line here, before I could reply that he was my neighbor, dinner was announced. Wedging his tense arm imperatively under mine, Tom Buchanan compelled me from the room as though he were moving a checker to another square. So that shows us the manipulative side of Tom. So we've got that in our heads, and it also shows us the weakness and malleability of the narrator. He is able to be moved around. He is shown as a wallflower who doesn't participate, who watches what's happening and allows things to happen to him and around him while he's not really part of them. So it's a fantastic chapter. We really get a lot about everybody. And then here we get a look at the difference between East Egg and West Egg. Sometimes she and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively, and with a bantering inconsequence that was never quite chatter, that was as cool as their white dresses and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. They were here, and they accepted Tom and me, making only a polite, pleasant effort to entertain or to be entertained. And they knew that presently dinner would be over, and a little later the evening too would be over and casually put away. It was sharply different from the West, where an evening was hurried from phase to phase toward its close, in a continually disappointed anticipation, or else in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. So, I just like the contrast of how they would do things in the East, where everybody just expects, you know, this is the lavish way that we live, and in the West, where it's very new to them to live that way. And I love that line, continually disappointed anticipation. Because, again, anticipation is always the most exciting part. And then when you get what you've been anticipating, all of these people getting the new money, they realize, you know, maybe they're having fun sometimes, but actually it's all just pointless. And what have they spent their life seeking? Is it really something that can ever be captured? This feeling that they're looking for. It can't be. Oh, Titanic moment. You know, I have to throw one in when there's like a reference that I can link to Titanic. I looked outdoors for a minute, and it's very romantic outdoors. There's a bird on the lawn that I think must be a nightingale come over from, I can't read, come over on the Cunard or White Star Line. He's singing away. The White Star Line was the line that the Titanic was part of. So there's your Titanic reference for the day. I hope you enjoy it. I was so excited when I saw that. Here's an example of just some really beautiful prose. The wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night, with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. Blew the frogs full of life. I love that. There, just so much of the writing in here is really, really beautiful. Some of it is dense and difficult, but much easier than the previous two of his. This is much more understandable, I think. What is this? Another example of Nick not participating. High over the city, our line of yellow windows must have contributed their share of human secrecy to the casual watcher in the darkening streets. And I was him, too, looking up and wondering. I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. That is a great snapshot of Nick pretty much dissociating. Like, he is gone. He is, he's doing the thing where you, like, astral project and you're floating above your body and watching what's happening. And I like that he says it so clearly right there. It's sad. Here's where I can't read my writing. Oh, there's this part at one of Gatsby's parties where the guy who's really drunk tries to drive a car off and he wrecks it. And this is just an example of some of the humor in here. He's like, wonder if you'll tell me where there's a gasoline station? At least a dozen men, some of them a little better off than he was, explained to him that wheel and car were no longer joined by any physical bond. That made me laugh so much. He can't understand the wheel is not on the car anymore. Sir, you're not going anywhere. Just some funny moments in here. There's also some upsettingly racist moments, which, like, Fitzgerald, it seems like every time he just does that, it's really disappointing, and I wonder if those were his thoughts, or if he was trying to highlight that that's what it was like in that time. In a way, I think it could be that, because he uses Tom's racism to make Tom look like a complete idiot, so that was nice. Let's see. Dreamer versus realist. We passed a barrier of dark trees and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. So he is not like dreaming about another world, another life, the past, the great future. Nick's more of a realist, and he's got this girl right there with him, and he's perfectly satisfied with that. And here we have an example of the melancholy feeling of a dream coming true. This is when Gatsby finally gets Daisy in his house. He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Sometimes, too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence none of it was any longer real. Once he nearly toppled down a flight of stairs. He had passed visibly through 2 states, and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment and his unreasoning joy, he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwound clock. Perfect description of what it feels like. You know how it is. We've probably all done it. When you build up something in your mind so much, especially a romantic relationship, you can be dreaming about this person for weeks, months, years, and then when you finally get to it, it is exciting for a moment, and then it's like, oh, I don't have the anticipation anymore. And this is real now. And it's not what I thought it was, even if it's good. I just thought that was a great description of that. Couldn't read my handwriting for a second. Okay, so here's an example of perception. Like how I talked about all of the symbols being what they are only through the perception of the people who are giving them significance. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a world complete in itself, with its own standards and its own great figures, second to nothing, because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again, through Daisy's eyes. It is invariably saddening to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expended your own powers of adjustment. There's a lot of that in here, like, Daisy being the lens through which people look at the things that they already knew. Another example of repeating the past. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself perhaps that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then, but if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. So Gatsby is really using Daisy as this anchor. He feels like if his life went wrong at some point, he can use her to anchor himself and get back to what was good, because she represents what was good before the war, before everything went bad. And he does all of this, changing himself and becoming so wealthy to try and impress her and fit into her life. Here's in the middle of this argument, Nick remembers it's his birthday. He says, I was 30. Before me stretched the portentous, menacing road of a new decade. So there's always a theme in Fitzgerald's books of aging, and I think it goes right along with the idea of the changing era. So it's not just the people are getting older, but the world's getting older, and the world is getting wiser, sometimes a bit more foolish, because like a teenager growing up, they're learning things, but they also need to act out a little bit, have a few more fits before they become an adult. So the world is going through some growing pains, and some people are not up to dealing with it. Here's another example of being above the poor. She had caught a cold, and it made her voice huskier and more charming than ever, and Gatsby was overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth imprisons and preserves, of the freshness of many clothes, and of Daisy, gleaming like silver, safe and proud above the hot struggles of the poor. I guess he sees her as like this beacon, because even when he was poor, he always wanted to be wealthy. He wanted more than what he had, and so she is the pinnacle of that. She's just the symbol for him of everything he wants and everything he's worked for. Then we see, this is towards the end, the funeral, and Gatsby's father is there, and he's showing Nick a picture of the mansion that Gatsby lived in that he had sent to his father. It was a photograph of the house, cracked in the corners and dirty with many hands. He pointed out every detail to me eagerly. "Look there," and then sought admiration from my eyes. He had shown it so often that I think it was more real to him now than the house itself. Again, we keep going with this theme of anticipation and then reality, dreaming and then reality. What do we expect? What is actually here in front of us? And do we have the power to step out of our dream and focus on what is real? I just thought that was a great example of that. Because he's finally in the house that he's been gazing at this picture forever and feeling so proud of his son, and he's in the house, and that finally getting to see it is not as exciting as the photo that he's been carrying around. Then we have this great list, this schedule that Gatsby made when he was younger about, you know, he's going to rise from bed at 6 a.m., he's going to do exercise, study electricity, work, baseball and sports, practice elocution, poise, and how to attain it, study needed inventions. And then bath every other day, read one improving book or magazine per week, save $5. So we just get to see how he was always like this, and he was always working towards something. Nothing was ever good enough. He wanted to improve himself and be good enough for Daisy and be good enough for the people that would live in East Egg. And then we have the final lines of the book. Gatsby believed in the green light, is it orgastic or orgastic future? I don't know that word. That year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Boom. All throughout the book, and at the very ending, we get the main theme, trying to repeat the past, and nothing that we ever expect being good enough for us when it comes to fruition, because dreaming is always better than experiencing. So interesting. Okay, let me know your thoughts. If I missed anything, I'll put it in the description. I'm sure I missed a lot. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this. It makes me want to watch the movie again. But if there are interpretations that I didn't mention, I would love to hear them. I'm not an expert by any means. I just read the book and then looked at some Spark Notes. And do you have thoughts on how this fits in with Fitzgerald's other works? What is his favorite book of yours? I promise I will read Tender is the Night next. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my 1920s look that took me forever to get into. I'm enjoying it, but I gotta go take it all off now, so thank you for sticking around, and I will see you next time with I don't know what. I've got no plans, but I'll see you then, old sport.